the existence of the God of classical theism. So, well, the introductory lesson here, we're looking at the God of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Now, there are differences between these religions, obviously, and the way these religions consider what God is, but there is a significant overlap between them. So let's get going. Does that God exist, or does he not exist? Proving God's non-existent. So let's start from this perspective first. Let's see if we can construct a framework within which we could show that there is no God. And we need to define who God is first, so we know what we're attacking. There's a problem though, and that is that according to these religions, God is supposed to be incomprehensible. So we're sort of stuck. In general, though, there may be a way forward. That is, in general, it is impossible to prove non-existence of a being unless its existence is logically incoherent. So it's not possible to prove non-existence of a being. To give you an example, it's not possible for me to prove. It's not possible for anyone to really prove that unicorns don't exist. It's just possible that they exist somewhere. I'd have to traverse the entirety of the universe and be everywhere all at the same time to say that, yep, it's just not there. But otherwise, it just could be there. So it's not possible that it's not really possible to prove non-existence of a being unless it is the existence of that being is logically incoherent. And so here are some examples. A circular square. It's just not possible for a circular square to exist. Like, you can't get one because you can't get one. It's logically not possible for that thing to exist. Same thing with a triangular point. The point doesn't really have any shape, which is kind of interesting. I mean, you think about it. Can you think of something that doesn't have a shape? I don't know if you can, but there is a point, and a point doesn't really have a shape. It's certainly not triangular, that's for sure. There's no such thing as a triangular point. So you cannot have a being that is a triangular point. You cannot have a being that is a circular square, and so it's easy to show that these things don't exist. An apple that is entirely green and red at the same time, it's just not possible. If it's entirely green, it's entirely green. It's not entirely green and entirely red at the same time. Instead of existing and not existing at the same time. That is, if something exists, then it does not exist, and if something does not exist, then it cannot exist at the same time in the same sense, in the same way, same place, same instance. So okay. So anyway, so there are some examples of that which is logically incoherent. So we can prove God's non-existence if his existence is logically incoherent. So we have a way forward. If we can establish that the very being of God, and specifically of God of classical theism, is logically incoherent, then such a God cannot exist. It's just wouldn't exist. So the question then is the existence of God logically incoherent? Well, we need to define God to move forward, and that's a problem. Suppose we could describe God precisely, properly, and fully correctly, so that we could have a definition of God, and then we can go over that definition and find something that is logically incoherent. If we could actually precisely, properly, and fully correctly describe God, then we could debate his existence in terms of logical coherence or not. But the problem is that a God that can be described in such a way by a human being is not a God of traditional religions. Right? In traditional religions, God is defined as incomprehensible to a human mind. So let's look at some texts from Quran. The first one is that the claim that the Quran makes is that no vision can grasp him, but his grasp is overall vision. He is above all comprehension, yet is acquainted with all things. So we can't comprehend him fully, according to Quran. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. His greatness is unsearchable. We cannot fully grasp him. That's from Psalms. And from the New Testament, Here you have letter to the Romans. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has known the mind of the Lord? So we cannot fully know him according to the New Testament. So God of traditional religions cannot be defined fully correctly by a human. Okay, so we have that. Now, atheists at this point will often make the claim, the following claim. So let's go over the following claim. It's an interesting one, and then we'll see how an atheist could respond to it. So, so here's what we have. Infinity appears to be irrational, and utterly confounding, and yet it is present everywhere. There's something about infinity that is just not. All right. So, anyways, what is after all the largest number? Like, can you think of a largest number? I mean, you can think of a billion to the power of billion to the power of billion to the power of billion multiplied by 2. You take that number and you can still add 1 to it, and then you can take that and raise it to the power of billion. And is that it? No, you can still add something to it, and take that and multiply it by another billion. And is that it? Now you can do this infinite. You can do it for as long as you'd want to, as long as it would be possible, until you drop dead and the story ends. And even then, you could still add another number to it and make it bigger. So largest number, can we even grasp? Can we even think of a largest number? And I have a background in math, and in mathematics and physics and sciences, we deal with infinities all the time. It's just that we hardly ever really pause to think about this stuff, I think. Here's another example. What do you get when you divide something by 0? It's, when you take 1 divided by 10, you get 1/10. When you take 1 divided by 100, you get 100. When you take 1 divided by 1,000, you get 1,000. When you take 1 divided by 10,000, you get 1/10,000th. And so you can extrapolate it a little farther. That when you take 1 and divide it by a large number, you get a very small number. And when you take that 1 divided by even larger number, you get even smaller number. And so if you take 1 and you divide it by infinity, you get 0. Now, if you were to take that, flip it, you would see that 1 over infinity gives you 0, right? So then you sort of manipulate this algebraically and you end up with 1 over 0 gives you infinity. How does that work? I mean, it works. We use this concept all the time. Although properly speaking, we use limits. But what does that really mean? So, infinity. Now, what is the shortest possible distance between 2 points? That is, how close can you bring 2 points to each other? There's a certain limitation, physical limitation, in terms of, it comes from quantum physics. Like the shortest possible distance is, what is it, Planck's? I think it's called Planck's distance. But anyways, if you put that aside, sort of just mentally speaking, how closely can you put 2 points, one next to the other? Like how, like one billionth of an inch? You could do better than that, right? You could take 1 billionth of that 1 billionth. But can you bring them closer? You can take 1 billionth of that distance. And how can you still bring it? Yeah, you can bring it. You can still bring it 1 billionth of that. And how long can you do that? How far you can continue to take 1 billionth of 1 billionth of 1 billionth of 1 billionth of 1 billionth, and you can go on and on and on and on. How closely can you bring these 2 points together? Can you actually go all the way to the end, to the infinity? In a limit, the 2 points just merge, but in a limit. So what is the shortest possible length of time? Same story, 1/10 of a second, 1,000th of a second. It's got to be less than that. 1 billionth of a second, 1 billionth of 1 billionth of a second. I think you get the point. Trying to grasp mentally what infinity is just, it's really confounding. It's really confounding. The more one ponders on the nature of infinity, the more one realizes how impossible infinity is to man's rational intellect. Now we can slap a symbol on infinity and then put it into equations, and we can manipulate this stuff around and get some realistic answers. But if we pause and think about infinities, it's hard. It's just hard to think about this stuff. And so now God, as defined in traditional religions, infinitely transcends, according to these religions, infinitely transcends all human understanding, because he is infinite in all of his nature and of all his being. God and his being is incomprehensible to man. like infinitely transcends human understanding, so God cannot be grasped correctly by human rational intellect. So what do we do with it? What do we do with it? Well, so again, the claim a theist could make now would be a wise man points at the moon. When a wise man points at the moon, the silly man examines the finger. This is what the rational intellect does when it attempts to understand the divine. Man cannot pin down the transcendent infinite, so he uses a metaphor to describe it, to describe God. So the rational intellect of a human can do only one thing at this point: attack the metaphor, show how this metaphor is incoherent, and claim victory over the divine. But in reality, human intellect is arguing not against the moon, but against the finger. So can we debate the existence of God? Well, I hope we can, because if we can't, then kind of wasting time. But here's the claim that a theist makes. And it's an interesting one, that's for sure. The last little statement on this slide is the heart of the of the claim. So an atheist could respond to it in the following way, and it's a very reasonable response. Okay, so it is possible that God of traditional religions does exist. Like, it's at this point in this whole story, we can certainly say that it's possible, it's conceivable, it's just possible that this God exists. But it also seems possible that such a God does not exist, right? From everything we've said so far, and we haven't really said much, it's possible that God could exist and that God could not exist. But I want to stick to the truth and not fairy tales. Like, I want to pursue the truth. I want to find the truth. I want to know the truth. I want to live the truth. I'm not interested in fairy tales. So how can I find out if such a God exists? And if the answer is that I cannot find this out, then why bother? Like, if I cannot figure out whether unicorns exist, then why should I waste my time trying to find it out if it's just not possible? So similarly, maybe God exists, maybe God doesn't exist. The atheist could say, well, but if I cannot determine if such a God exists, then why should I waste my time? Why bother? I have other things to do. So, and then of course, you know, the two atheists and an atheist could continue the discussion, and the story would go on. But just to sort of give you I think this is fair enough for an introduction here. Let's go a little farther. We could if I was teaching live, and at this point we could have a little bit of a discussion in terms of, okay, how would you respond to this, and then how would you respond to that response, and so on and so forth. But let's keep going. Let's get back to the description of God. So we cannot precisely and fully correctly describe God of classical theistic religions, because these religions claim that that is the case. By definition, our mind and language are insufficient to do this. Maybe we can describe God to some extent, though, partially perhaps by analogy. So maybe there's some way of moving forward in that, okay, we cannot, let's say we grant that this God is such that we cannot fully properly, correctly describe this God, but maybe we can describe this God to some extent, and then see if that holds logical ground, if that's logically coherent. If it is, then maybe there's something to work with. If it isn't, then maybe it's not worth pursuing any further. So, for example, and in fact, to give you a case here in point, at least Aquinas makes the claim that God can be described in an analogous way. So we can use our language to describe God, but it wouldn't be the proper description. It would be an analogous description of God. So an example, the goodness of God is not the same thing as the goodness of a human, but these would be analogical terms. So God is good, kind of in a sense that we would say a human person is good, is the claim. So we are told there is some analogy between these two terms. The goodness of God is different than the goodness of man, but there's some sort of an overlap. So you have analogy. So here's a description of the God of classical theism. And Islam, Judaism, and Christianity would agree on this. Well, I guess there are different, that's traditional conceptions, because within Christianity you have so many different flavors. Within Judaism you have a number of different flavors as well, if you will, and then same thing within Islam. But um, traditionally speaking, so along the lines of Aquinas, and who draws all the way from Aristotle. And then there were Muslim philosophers between Aristotle and Aquinas, and oh, I should know the names. I forget, to be truthful. There were a few significant. Avicenna was one, Averroes was another one. Okay, and then there were others, but like these were the main ones, I think, at least as far as my memory serves. All right. Well, anyway, so it is not a being among other beings, and I'll have to say a few more things about that. But this God of classical theism is just not yet another being that is among other beings. Rather, this God of classical theism is like the fountainhead of all existence. It's the existence itself that grants itself. It's the source of existence of other things. So it's not a being among beings, but it's the source of being. Continual source of all reality of all beings. Every existent being is upheld in existence by this God. Two, the attributes. So it's immaterial, it's one and unique, eternal, not bound by time. It's changeless, the word is immutable, all powerful, which is omnipotent, perfectly good, and is all knowing or omniscient. And then all of these attributes merge, because there's no division in God, and it's just this being of God, according to these religions, is perfectly uniquely simple. And what that means is that his existence, his goodness, his mercy, his justice, his power, all of that stuff just blends into one thing. It's just one. If you can make sense out of that. And try to prove that. Try to prove that God exists. It's a tall order. So most philosophers agree that. Like, today, I think if you look at, I think this is true. Proving God's existence using logic, most philosophers would agree that it's hard. Even those who claim that it can be determined that God does exist, that the God of classical theism does exist. For example, there are Thomas philosophers called Thomas who follow, well, Thomas Aquinas. They would claim that you can establish the existence of God with mathematical certainty, using arguments, using logic, like valid arguments, solid arguments. Even they would say that it's hard to establish that. Most philosophers are not Thomists, and most philosophers would agree that proving God's non-existence using logic is hard as well. Like, it just seems hard to do that. So let's see what else. Is there another way other than logic to obtain knowledge? I mean, if it takes, let's say that, maybe the argument for God's existence does actually work out, but let's say it takes like 30 pages and it is so complex, so convoluted that a select few are capable to grasp it and say yes, it works. And most of the people are like, what just happened? I can't make sense out of that. Let's say it's really, really hard. So is there another way to figure out if there is a God? Some claim that there is. So let's just briefly put this here. It runs along these lines here. How do we know these truths, right? I know I exist. Like, I just know I exist. I don't have to prove to myself that I exist. I just know it. When I'm happy, I know I'm happy. I don't have to reason about whether I'm happy or not. I just like, yeah, I'm happy. Or when I'm angry, I'm not gonna sit in the corner and think about it. Yeah, I was really angry over there. But it's just when I'm angry, I know I'm angry. And the same thing with when I'm loved or when I love, and so on. So human intuition, right? There are some things that we just simply grasp without any reasoning about it. We don't come to the conclusion that I'm angry. I just know I'm angry. So can we know that God exists in the same way that we know one of these above? Like, I know I exist. Can I likewise know that God exists? The Descartes, I think, makes a similar claim, actually, that yes, that he claims that he knows that God exists in the same way that he knows that he exists. So the argument from religious experience says that yes, supposedly during religious experience, I know that I'm loved, and I know that I'm loved by God, and somehow I just know it. That is the claim. The argument for God from religious experience, we'll consider this argument again in another PowerPoint. I think it shows up again. I think it does. It works for those who experience it. And for those who don't experience it, not so much. Unless they choose to believe those who had the experience. And so, of course, if somebody had the experience and they're convinced that there is a God, it'd be difficult to convince them that they're wrong. So what do we have? Summary. Appears impossible to show that God doesn't exist. Appears impossible to show that God does exist. And I'm gonna put here appears and appears because some philosophers will claim that it can be shown that God exists. And I'm going to show you some of the arguments that are put forth for that position. And it appears impossible to show that God doesn't exist. Actually, I'm actually not aware of any argument that shows that God doesn't exist. But there may be some out there. I'm just not aware of them. And then it appears that only few claim direct experience of God, religious experience. I actually don't know. I have no stats on this one. I mean, I wrote this here, but I don't really have any statistics on this one. How many claim that they have had a religious experience of something greater? Maybe a significant number of people. I don't really know. I put few, but maybe not so few. So what do we do? Well, we're gonna end the presentation here. This is the introduction to the unit on the philosophy of religion, where our focus is going to be on the classical conception of God, of theism. There's a debate that I think is reasonable. It's between a philosopher and a clinical psychologist, and it's a pretty good debate, I would say. I want you to watch it, and I'm gonna make an assignment for this. So just write. Well, I'll state what the assignment is on Canvas, but watch this debate. I don't think you necessarily have to watch the whole thing. The whole thing is about 50 minutes, but if you watch half of it, a third of it, I mean, that's probably reasonable. You can think about these questions that I have here. So questions to answer and discuss. I'm not asking you to answer all of these, but you can think about these. Are there universal, transcendent, unchangeable truths? Are there any absolutes? Is there anything sacred out there? Can religion point to or bring about something sacred? Is human life meaningful without the sacred or transcendent things? And the debate itself is titled Living Without the Sacred, or the question is, can we live without the sacred? Like, is it possible to... Actually, I don't know if they go that far, but can we... Well, anyways, living without the sacred, there's the debate, Peterson versus D'Souza. All right.